Okay, thank you for having BlinkLab here. Today I'm going to talk about a slightly different topic, which is autism and ADHD, and specifically autism and ADHD diagnosis. So my background, I'm trained as a medical doctor in Europe. Then we moved to the US, where I did a postdoc in neuroscience at Princeton. And during the COVID pandemic, we made this BlinkLab invention, and I want to share this invention with you guys and tell you, basically convince you how this is going to improve autism and ADHD diagnosis in the very near future. So in a nutshell, BlinkLab is an AI-powered, smartphone-based platform. So we use AI, we use accessible technology, but the thing that makes us really unique is that neurological testing component. Brief corporate snapshot. So we listed on the ASX almost a year ago for 20 cents. Right now we're trading around 40 cents. We have around 100 million shares on issue, and 37% of those shares are owned by the shareholders, or by the founders. So what is autism? So autism is a neurodevelopmental condition that severely impacts how the brain processes sensory information. This quote is from Rain Man, by the way. And autism can impact many daily life functions, including social development, speech development, language development, but also the way that the brain processes sensory information. So what's interesting to know is that the autism prevalence goes up. It goes up in the US, goes up in Australia, it goes up in Japan. It's the same pattern everywhere. So that means that right now between 2 and 4% of all children are diagnosed with autism. And when you look at the economic burden of autism on the healthcare system, it's enormous, it's dazzling. And this is only autism. There's also ADHD, it's even worse. And also want to give you an idea about the healthcare expenses. The lifetime cost for an individual with autism in the US are around 3.7 million US dollars. Because we are close to Australia, most of you must be familiar with the NDIS, National Disability Insurance Scheme. 35% of all that money goes to autism, which means 8.4 billion Australian dollars. And this goes up every year by more than 20%. And most of that money goes to supervised independent living in adults. So how are we going to improve that? So key, and this is true for any condition, any medical disorder, any neurological disorder, early diagnosis leads to better clinical outcomes. And there's a huge consensus in the neuroscience, in the autism community, that early intervention, early detection leads to very substantial improvements later in life. And one of the most important things that we can give children is that they can live independently by themselves. This is great for the family, this is great for the child, this is also great for society. And that's the reason why the American Academy for Pediatrics is recommending that each child is screened for autism at least twice during early development, at 18 months and at 24 months. Right now, this is not happening because there's no system in place to take care of this. But imagine a tool that could do this, an accessible tool using AI, then we are talking about a huge market. We're talking about millions of kids that are born each year in the US, in Europe, and also in Australia. The problem, however, is that there is no medical test available for autism. Most of us kind of believe that there is some kind of MRI scan or maybe some blood work that you can do that confirms the diagnosis of autism, but that's not true. It's based on observations, on talking with the family, talking with the school, and at some point you label the child as autistic or as ADHD, but there is no medical test available, and that's a struggle. There's no biomarker available. This leads to a very complicated system where parents that are concerned about the child's development, they go to a GP, but the GP is not diagnosing. What happens is that the GP is kind of referring to other specialists, including speech therapy, occupational psychologists. They go in circles and they keep going. Nobody will diagnose except for the neuropsychologist after a couple of years. And this is extremely unfortunate because then the child is diagnosed around the age of, let's say, 6, 7. That leads to late intervention, and that leads to poor clinical outcomes. So basically what happens is that family is in years, there is uncertainty for the family. They have no diagnosis, they have no access to treatment. So how are we going to solve this? Well, by developing a tool that is highly accurate in terms of sensitivity, specificity, that is accessible, and that can be used by families at home and is prescribed by a GP. Instead of going through those roller coaster of occupational speech, everybody, you can go straight to the neuropsychologist. The neuropsychologist uses the BlinkLab testing as an objective tool in addition to the subjective screening that the neuropsychologist or the psychiatrist is doing, leads to early autism diagnosis, leads to early and personalized intervention. And of course, the magic happens here in that autism screening. So I'm going to explain to you how that works. And this is actually really cool tech. So we have developed a smartphone-based platform where children can do the testing by themselves at home with the mom, with the dad, doesn't matter. And the only thing that the child is doing is watching a video for about maybe 10, 15 minutes. And that's basically it. There is no long questionnaires involved. There is no testing that the child has to do. It's basically watching that video. But what we are doing while the child is having fun watching Toy Story, every now and then we surprise the child by a stimulus that is kind of unexpected. And we look at facial reflex responses. So we look, for instance, at eye movements, we look at eye blinks, we look at mouth movements, and we evoke these facial reflex responses by unexpected stimuli that are presented while the child is watching that video. Based on these facial reflex responses, we can predict with very high sensitivity and specificity whether the child is typically developing, so that means neurotypical, or whether the child has ADHD or autism. So this is, of course, eye candy. This is kind of to give you a first impression, but I also want to share with you the really raw data. So how does that look? So this is a boy doing a BlinkLab test. This boy is neurotypical, so that means he has no autism. And he is watching that same video for 10, 15 minutes. And every now and then we surprise him by an unexpected stimulus that kind of sounds like that. It's kind of a white noise burst. I'll play it again. Look at the video. You see, the boy blinks. It's a very simple reflex. It's exactly the same as the knee tendon, right? You tap the knee, the leg goes. There's no voluntary control whatsoever. It's just a reflex. But we can use this reflex in a very interesting way, because when we change the stimulus pattern, instead of one stimulus, now we present two stimuli. So a stimulus pattern that looks like this. What you see here, what you can appreciate, is that the boy is not blinking anymore. So what's going on here? Why is this happening? First of all, as a medical doctor, as a neuroscientist, this tells me that the filter function of the boy's brain is perfectly intact. What happens here is that this soft stimulus is kind of preparing the brain that something is about to happen, and you don't startle, you don't blink anymore. Our brain is continuously making short-term predictions about the very near future. That's how we kind of interact with the future and how we process sensory information, that we have a filter in our brain. While we're sitting here, there's a lot of stimuli bombarding your brain. It can be olfactory, can be visual, can be anything, but you're able to focus on the conversation that we are having here. So that's called the filter function of the brain, or sensory motor gating. And we know that this filter function is severely impaired in autism. When you talk with a family with an autistic child, they will tell you very often that the child is struggling in the swimming pool or the flashlights of the tunnel. Any environment that is very rich in terms of sensory stimuli is a total disaster for the child. So we can test this. So when you do the exact same PPI test, pre-pulse inhibition test, in children on the spectrum, you will find data that looks like this. So you present one stimulus, nothing special, just a blink, same as the reflex blink when you tap the knee, but then you present them both. And many of these kids on the spectrum will show a reaction that looks like this. The boy is not using that soft stimulus to kind of anticipate, and the boy still blinks. So this tells me, as a medical doctor, as a neuroscientist, the sensory motor gating is severely impaired in this boy with autism. And we can use this PPI test during the video session as one of the objective biomarkers for autism. There's way more. This is just one example, but this is a great example that basically stands for the other testing that we are doing. So what we do is fundamental old school neuroscience, but now on a smartphone. That's basically our patent. We look at the small facial reflex responses, and we use, of course, computer vision AI to analyze that data. We use it as a biomarker, and more specifically, we evaluate it to assess specific brain functions. So the knee tendon reflex, for instance, tells me that certain neural circuits are intact or are not functioning, and the same does the startle, eye blink response, and all the other responses that we're looking at with BlinkLab technology. So we announced the results of a large-scale study that we conducted a couple of months ago, where we basically validate this technology, and we found that for autism specifically, we have a high accuracy. That means a sensitivity of 91 and a specificity of 85%. So we're quite happy with these results, especially with the specificity, because that's what you need in a healthcare system that's already overwhelmed by the amount of patients. So what's even more important, I think, is that our technology can differentiate between autism and ADHD, and also can tell whether the child has both. So we are doing a big study with University of Monash. We announced that a couple of weeks ago, where we do a large, it's called a magnet study, where we look at the co-occurrence of autism and ADHD. I'll very simply explain to you how that works. When you do the PPI test, so the soft stimulus and the loud stimulus, you can appreciate in green that children that are neurotypical, they don't respond anymore, which is the neurotypical reaction. Children on the spectrum, they will respond with with an eye blink to the second pulse, what you can see here. But when we do that test in children with ADHD, what we found is that, and this is new science, by the way, that they're hyper-responsive to the soft sound. So the weak stimulus is sufficient to evoke a blink. So that tells me that they are overreacting to all that stimuli. So in the end, what we do, we basically measure sensory sensitivity in autism and ADHD. And I have to emphasize again that this data that I'm showing you here is maybe cool to watch, but this is not new data. This data has been around in the neuroscience community for decades. But what we did, we made it available for smartphone technology. The only way of conducting this type of testing was by inviting families to very specialized labs, install all kind of equipment on the child's face. Didn't work, but now we have it available for smartphones, so it's extremely scalable. A few words about competition. We just started our FDA regulatory trial. There's two competitors here. The first one is Cognoa, the other one is Early Tech. They already completed their FDA trials, which is great for BlinkLab, because that means that this technology is approvable by the FDA. We had our pre-submission meeting with the FDA that went really well. Our sensitivity specificity, so basically the diagnostic accuracy, is better than the competition. So we just started our FDA regulatory trial. The timeline for you guys is probably important. So we started the trial. We took all the steps that you have to take before you even can start a trial. We will announce the results of the first part of the study, the initial results, in 3-4 months from now. And then we will continue with data collection till the end of the year and then submit to the FDA. And they will have about 90 days to review the data. We are experts in team. There's a fantastic advisory board. We have Brian Liebman on board, Jane Morgan and Richard, and the scientific advisors are all key opinion leaders in the field in the US. I'm going to leave you with that. Really appreciate your audience, your listening, and feel free to drop by if you have any questions about BlinkLab or investment opportunities. Thank you.